It was a quiet afternoon when I decided to visit the swimming pool. The city felt unbearably heavy that day, full of noise, faces, and thoughts I didn't want to face. The water, I thought, might silence everything for a while. My life had become predictable: wake up, work, return home to a marriage that felt more like a habit than love. We spoke less, smiled even less. It wasn't anger between us, just distance, like two people living parallel lives under the same roof. I didn't go to the pool looking for anything, only peace. The air around the pool was warm and smelled faintly of chlorine. I slipped into the water, feeling it cool against my skin, and for a few moments, everything was calm. Then, across the pool, I noticed him, a tall African man, his skin glistening under the afternoon light. He moved through the water with an ease that caught my attention. There was confidence in him, not arrogance but something quietly grounded. Our eyes met briefly before I looked away, pretending to focus on swimming. Yet, something about that first glance stayed with me. After a while, we found ourselves near the same corner of the pool. He smiled, the kind of warm smile that melts away awkwardness, and said, "You swim well." I laughed a little, surprised by his friendly tone. "Not really," I said. "Just trying to remember how." We both laughed, and the tension vanished instantly. He introduced himself: Daniel, visiting from another country for a few months, working nearby. There was something sincere about the way he spoke, as if he meant every word, as if conversation with a stranger still mattered. That we started talking, slowly at first, about simple things. The weather. The pool. The city. I told him how quiet it felt to swim. He said he liked how water made people forget who they were for a moment. That line stayed with me. Maybe he was right. In the water, we were just two people floating, without titles, without burdens. As time passed, I noticed how natural it felt to talk to him. He laughed easily, listened carefully, and had a calmness that pulled me in. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. We shared a few light jokes, splashing water at each other like children, and I caught myself smiling without effort. It was strange how comfortable it felt, like we had known each other far longer than the few minutes we'd spoken. The sun began to dip, casting golden reflections on the water's surface. Daniel swam to the edge and leaned against it, looking at me. "You come here often?" he asked. "Not really," I said, "but maybe I should." He chuckled softly and said, "Then I might see you again." His words sounded casual, but something in the tone felt different, gentle, almost inviting. When I left the pool that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but there was something there, something that filled a quiet part of me I didn't even know was empty. On the way home, I caught myself smiling again. It felt strange, almost guilty, but honest. For years, I had forgotten what it was like to feel connected, even in the smallest ways. That night, lying in bed beside my wife, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept drifting back to the pool, to Daniel's laughter, to the way his eyes seemed to hold no judgment. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly encounter. But deep down, I knew it had stirred something. A feeling I hadn't felt in years: warmth, curiosity, and a quiet sense of peace. I closed my eyes and tried to push it away, but the image of calm blue water and a stranger's smile stayed with me, lingering softly like a memory that didn't want to fade. The next afternoon, I found myself walking back toward the swimming pool without even deciding to. It felt like my body moved before my thoughts could catch up. I told myself I just wanted to swim again, to clear my mind, but a part of me already knew that wasn't the truth. I wanted to see him. I wanted to feel that quiet ease again, the kind that had slipped into my heart without warning. When I reached the pool, Daniel was already there, sitting on the edge with his feet in the water. He looked up, smiled when he saw me, and waved as if he had been waiting. I tried to play it casual, greeting him with the same smile, but something inside me fluttered. We talked again, and this time, it wasn't small talk. He asked me how my day had been, if I slept well, if life at home was peaceful. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated before answering, "It's fine." He looked at me for a moment, as though he saw through the word. Then he nodded slowly, saying, "Sometimes, fine just means tired." We slipped into the water together. The sound of the pool, the laughter of children, the soft splashes around us, all faded into the background. He told me about his life back home, about growing up near the ocean, where the waves were stronger than here. There was something soothing about the way he spoke, as if every word came from a calm, deep place. I found myself opening up too, speaking of things I rarely said out loud. I told him I felt distant from everything lately, from my work, from my wife, from myself. He didn't interrupt or offer solutions. He just listened, and somehow, that was enough. After swimming, we sat by the poolside, water dripping down our arms. The evening sun stretched long shadows across the floor. Daniel looked thoughtful and said quietly, "It's strange how you can live with someone and still feel alone." His voice was gentle, not judging, just real. The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't reply, I just looked down at the water, its surface trembling with small ripples. Over the next few days, we kept meeting. Sometimes by chance, sometimes because one of us hinted we would be there. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He told me stories that made me laugh, stories that made me think. With him, there was no need to pretend, no fear of being misunderstood. One evening, we sat silently, watching the sunset reflect on the pool's surface, and he said, "When you stop fighting what you feel, life becomes lighter." Those words lingered in my head long after I went home. I began to notice how different I felt when I was around him. It wasn't only about attraction, it was something deeper, something that gave me a strange sense of peace. At home, though, things felt heavier. My wife noticed I was quieter, lost in thought, but she didn't ask. Maybe she already knew something had changed. That night, Daniel sent me a message, "You look distant today. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, just thinking too much. He responded, "Don't be afraid of your thoughts. They're only trying to show you who you really are." I didn't know what to say back. His words felt both comforting and terrifying. That I lay awake that night, thinking about him, about what all of this meant. Was it wrong to feel this connection? Was I betraying someone, or just finally being honest with myself? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that when I thought of him, the world felt quieter, easier, softer. I hadn't felt that kind of peace in years. The next time we met, I told him that being around him made me feel seen in a way I didn't understand. He smiled, then reached out and placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "You don't need to understand it," he said softly. "Just don't be ashamed of it." His hand stayed there for a moment, and in that silence, something inside me shifted, a calm acceptance, mixed with fear. I didn't know what this connection would lead to, but I knew it had already changed something deep within me.
That night, sleep refused to come. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. The tall man's words kept echoing in my mind, about people disappearing, about mistakes, about peace slipping away. There was something behind those words, something he hadn't said. I turned off the light and lay still, listening to the ticking clock, when suddenly I heard faint movement from the hallway. At first, I thought it was the wind again, but the sound was steady, soft footsteps moving slowly across the wooden floor. My heart began to race. I got up quietly, opened my door, and peeked into the dim corridor. The tall man was there, his shadow stretched across the wall. He was standing near the shelf where I kept old family photographs and letters. I watched as he reached out and picked up one of the frames, the same picture he had stared at the first night. I stepped closer and spoke his name softly. He turned around quickly, surprised, the frame still in his hand. His expression wasn't angry, just filled with something deep and unreadable. "I couldn't sleep," he said quietly. "I just wanted to look again." I walked toward him, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked, "You said this man looked familiar. How do you know him?" He looked down at the photo and took a long breath before answering. "Because he was my friend," he said. "And he betrayed me in a way I never forgot." The room fell silent. I felt the air grow heavier, the quiet pressing between us like a wall. He set the frame down gently and continued. "Years ago, I trusted him more than anyone. We worked together, dreamed together. But one day, he made a choice that ruined everything I had built. I lost my home, my family, and eventually, myself. When I heard he had passed away, I thought I'd moved on, but when I saw his face in this picture, I realized I still hadn't. His voice trembled, but not from anger. It was pain mixed with exhaustion, the kind that only time can't heal. I didn't know what to say. I had never imagined that the stranger I had let in from the rain carried a story that touched my own family's past. I told him quietly that my father had changed near the end of his life, that he often spoke of mistakes he wished he could undo, of people he wished he could face again. The tall man looked at me then, his eyes filled with both sadness and relief. "I didn't come here for revenge," he said after a pause. "I just wanted to see the place where my past ended. Maybe understand why it all happened." His voice softened. "When I saw you, I realized that life doesn't stop after betrayal, it just changes shape. Maybe your father understood that too." We sat down, both lost in thought. The night outside was still, and the faint sound of crickets filled the silence between us. I could see how deeply this man had been hurt, how much he had carried alone. But in that moment, I also saw something else, a man trying to let go. I brought him some water, and we talked quietly for hours. He told me about the good days before everything went wrong, about laughter, long journeys, and the friendship that had once felt unbreakable. I listened, not as a stranger but as someone who finally understood the weight of regret. By the time the clock struck 2, his voice had grown tired. "I think I found what I was looking for," he said softly. "Not answers, just peace." He stood up and looked around the room one last time, his gaze calm. "Your father must have loved you very much. I can see it in this house, in how carefully you've kept his memories." I didn't try to stop him when he said he needed some air. He walked to the front door, paused, and looked back. "Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come in words," he said. "It comes in understanding." Then he stepped outside, disappearing into the quiet night. I stood there for a long while, staring at the open door, the cold breeze brushing against my face. For the first time, I understood the strange connection between his pain and my father's silence. Two men bound by betrayal, both searching for peace in their own ways. The night had revealed more than I expected, but somehow, it also felt like something inside both of us had finally healed. The morning light slipped gently through the curtains, spreading across the floor like a quiet whisper. The house felt unusually still. The tall man's room was empty, the bed neatly made, and the window slightly open. He had left before dawn. For a moment, I stood there, unsure of what to feel: relief, sadness, or gratitude. Outside, the air smelled of wet earth and sunlight, the kind that follows a long night of rain and reflection. I walked to the porch, half expecting to see him on the road, but there was no one. Only the sound of birds and the faint rustle of leaves. On the table near the door, I noticed a folded note. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The handwriting was firm but uneven, as if written with emotion that words could barely contain. "Thank you," the note began. "For your kindness, your silence, and your understanding. I came here to face a memory that haunted me for years. I found more than forgiveness, I found peace. You reminded me that not every chapter ends in anger. Sometimes, it ends quietly, with gratitude." I read the words twice, maybe 3 times. Each sentence carried a warmth that lingered long after I put the paper down. In that moment, I realized he hadn't just come to meet his past, he had come to leave it behind. As I sat on the porch, the morning sun touched the edge of the garden, lighting up every drop of dew. I could almost hear his voice again, calm and sincere. "Don't let someone else's mistakes take away your peace." I finally understood what he meant. Betrayal doesn't only break relationships, it tests the strength of the heart. Some people never recover, but others learn to forgive, not because the pain disappears, but because holding on to it only darkens the soul. Later that day, I walked to the small repair shop at the corner to ask about his car. The mechanic told me it had been picked up early that morning. He didn't say much, only that the man seemed calm, as if he was finally done running from something. I thanked him and returned home, feeling strangely lighter inside. The house looked the same, yet everything felt different. The silence no longer felt heavy, it felt peaceful. I made tea and sat near the window, letting the light fall across the table. The photo he had looked at so many times was still there, untouched, but it no longer carried the same weight. It was no longer a reminder of regret, it had become a symbol of closure. That night, as the stars appeared one by one, I thought about how 2 lives had crossed by chance, or perhaps by fate. One carrying the scars of betrayal, the other holding the legacy of it. Yet somehow, both found healing in the same place. The past had come quietly to my door, not to reopen old wounds, but to remind me that even broken stories can find a gentle ending. I whispered a quiet goodbye to the night sky, imagining that somewhere on the long road ahead, the tall man was finally free from his burden. And as I closed the door, a sense of calm washed over me. The home that had once held the echoes of regret now felt alive again, filled with light, forgiveness, and the quiet beauty of understanding. Of the next morning, I placed his letter inside the same frame he had once held. It felt right to keep it there, a message of peace where pain once lived. I looked around the room, smiled softly, and whispered, "Some goodbyes don't hurt, they heal." And with that, the story of the tall man and his long-forgotten past came to an end, leaving behind not sadness, but a lesson. A reminder that betrayal may wound deeply, but forgiveness, silent, sincere, and pure, has the power to bring light even to the darkest corners of the heart.